The first thing Commander Ilara Voss noticed was that the frequency should not exist anymore. It cut through the static of the deep-range observatory like a scalpel, clean, deliberate, and impossibly old. The signal bore the modulation signature of a human encryption protocol that had been obsolete for 7 centuries. She had memorized those patterns during her first year at the Academy, not because anyone still used them, but because they represented humanity's first clumsy attempts to reach beyond the solar system. The encoding was primitive, almost childlike in its structure, but it was unmistakably human. And it was coming from the rendezvous point where the Odysseus had last transmitted before vanishing in 2347. Ilara's hand stopped moving over the console. The ambient hum of the Ethelred's bridge faded into a dull roar in her ears. The Odysseus had been a colony vessel, one of the great generational arcs launched during the First Diaspora, carrying 50,000 souls toward what was supposed to be a new Earth in the TRAPPIST-1 system. It had never arrived. The ship simply disappeared 700 years ago, swallowed by the void along with every man, woman, and child on board. The official inquiry concluded that a catastrophic navigation failure had sent them into interstellar space, where they would drift forever as frozen ghosts. No distress call, no debris field, no explanation. Until now. Lieutenant Marcus Chen appeared at her side, coffee forgotten in his hand, droplets beading on the rim of the mug. "That's not possible," he said. His voice was calm, but Ilara had served with him long enough to hear the crack beneath the surface. "The Odysseus was lost. There's nothing left out there but radiation and silence." "The signal is real," Ilara said. She pulled up the telemetry, watching the data cascade across her display. "It's weak, degraded, but it's repeating on a loop. Standard colonial emergency protocol, position beacon, automated distress." She paused, her throat tightening. "It's broadcasting from coordinates consistent with the Odysseus's last known trajectory, adjusted for relativistic drift." Marcus set the mug down. It hit the console with a dull thunk. 700 years. Even if the ship survived, the power source wouldn't last that long. Nothing lasts that long. "This signal is 700 years old," Ilara said, "but it's still transmitting. Someone maintained it, or something did." The bridge of the Ethelred fell silent. The other officers had stopped pretending not to listen. Commander Voss was not given to speculation. She was a pilot first, a tactician second, and a dreamer never. That was why Command had given her this ship, a deep space surveyor, tasked with mapping the ghost lanes between settled systems. She was supposed to find anomalies, not answer them, but this anomaly was screaming. She made the decision before her brain finished processing the risks. "Plot an intercept course, maximum sustainable velocity. I want us in transmission range within 6 hours." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Ilara, we don't have authorization for this. The Odysseus is a historical marker. There are protocols, preservation laws. If we do nothing, 50,000 names on a memorial wall remain unanswered," she said. "If we go, we might learn what happened, or we might find nothing. Either way, we owe them that much." She did not say what she was really thinking. She did not tell Marcus that the signal's encryption key matched one she had seen before, not in any database, but in a classified memory core her father had shown her 20 years ago, before he died. He had been a deep space researcher, one of the last people alive who still studied the Odysseus disappearance as more than a historical footnote. He had believed the ship was not destroyed. He had believed something found it. He had spent the last decade of his life chasing whispers, and he had died in a maintenance bay accident that never felt quite like an accident to Ilara. The Ethelred burned through the void. 6 hours became 4 as Marcus pushed the engines beyond their rated tolerance, and Ilara did not stop him. The signal grew stronger as they closed the distance, each pulse carrying more data than the last. The automated distress message was simple, a recorded plea from Captain Ilona Petrosian, the Odysseus's commander, repeating on an endless loop. But beneath that layer, buried in the carrier wave, Ilara found something else. A second signal, deliberately hidden, encrypted with a protocol that had never been publicly documented. "I need you to look at this," she said, pulling Marcus toward her station. "Tell me what you see." He studied the waveform for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had lost its professional detachment. This isn't colonial encryption. This is military-grade black book. The kind of thing that wasn't supposed to exist until 100 years after the Odysseus launched. He looked at her. How is this possible? Hilara had no answer, but she remembered her father's journals, the ones she had burned after his funeral because they contained things that should not have been written, references to a project codenamed Kronos, experiments with folded space-time, warnings about something that lived between the layers of reality, something that had noticed humanity's reaching. She had told herself the journals were the product of a grieving mind, fractured by loss and isolation, but the signal was real. The encryption was real. And every kilometer they traveled brought her closer to a truth she had spent 20 years trying to forget. The Ethelred dropped out of FTL at the edge of a debris field. Not the chaotic scattering of a ship destroyed by violence or accident, but an organized spiral of wreckage, as if the Odysseus had been taken apart piece by piece and arranged in a pattern that made Ilara's eyes ache when she looked at it too long. At the center of the spiral hung the ship itself. It was intact, 700 years lost, and the Odysseus looked as if it had been launched yesterday. Its hull bore no scars of micrometeorite impacts. Its solar arrays remained extended, catching light from a star that was barely a pinprick at this distance. Running light still pulsed along its spine, dim but steady. The ship was not dead. It was waiting. Life signs, Marcus whispered. He was staring at his own display, fingers frozen over the sensors. Faint, but they're there. Thousands of them. In stasis. He turned to Ilara, and she saw genuine fear in his eyes. They're still alive. All of them. How is that possible? 700 years in stasis with no maintenance, no resupply, no... They had help, Ilara said. She had already begun powering up the shuttle. Someone kept them alive. Someone preserved the ship, and they want us to find it. Marcus grabbed her arm. We need to report this. Command needs to know. We're not equipped for first contact. We're not equipped for any of this. Command will send a science team, Ilara said. They'll take months to deliberate. They'll quarantine the area. And by the time they arrive, whatever is waiting on that ship will have made its decision. She met his gaze. I'm not waiting for permission. I'm not letting 50,000 people die again. She did not wait for his response. She was already moving toward the airlock, already pulling on her environmental suit, already committing herself to a course of action that would either make her the greatest hero in human history or get her court-martialed before she could explain herself. The shuttle crossed the distance in silence. Ilara did not speak to the two crew members who had volunteered to accompany her, Ensign Sophia Okonkwo, a biologist with nerves of steel, and Petty Officer Dmitry Volkov, a salvage specialist who had seen more wreckage than anyone alive. They knew the risks. They had come anyway. Docking with the Odysseus was surreal. The airlock cycled automatically, responding to protocols that had been programmed before Ilara's great-grandparents were born. When the inner door opened, she stepped into a corridor that looked exactly like the historical recreations she had seen in museums. The same curved bulkheads, the same recessed lighting, the same faded blue paint that had been standard on colonial vessels of that era. But the recreations had never captured the smell. The air was old, not stale, not decayed, but old in a way that felt like pressure against her skin, like the ship was breathing. Sophia's hand scanner flickered to life. Atmosphere is breathable. Trace contaminants within acceptable limits. Temperature is consistent. Too consistent. It's like the environmental systems never stopped running. They didn't, Dmitry said. He had already dropped to one knee, running his fingers along a seam in the deck plating. Look at this. No corrosion, no wear. These bulkheads are 700 years old, but they haven't aged a day. He looked up, and Ilara saw the same fear that had been in Marcus's eyes. Something has been maintaining this ship. Something with access to technology we don't have. The corridor led to the command deck. Ilara had studied the Odysseus's schematics hundreds of times as a child, tracing the layout with her finger, while her father told her stories about the people who had lived and died here. She knew exactly where to go. But when she reached the bridge doors, she stopped. They were open and someone was inside. The figure stood with its back to her, facing the main viewport. It wore a uniform that matched the archival images of the Odysseus's crew, grey jumpsuit with gold trim, the insignia of a senior navigation officer on the collar. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and completely motionless. Ilara's hand went to her sidearm. "Identify yourself," she said. The figure turned. It was a man. His face was weathered, lined with age or stress or something else entirely, but his eyes were young. Too young. They held a sharpness that did not belong to a body that should have been 7 centuries dead. He looked at Ilara, and she saw recognition dawn across his features. "You have your father's eyes," he said. The words hit her like a physical blow. She had never met this man. She had never seen his face in any historical record. But he knew her father. He knew her. "Who are you?" she demanded. "My name is Elias Kane." He took a step forward, and Ilara did not step back. "I was the Odysseus's navigation officer. I was on this ship when it disappeared." He paused, and his expression shifted. Grief, exhaustion, and something that looked like hope. "I've been waiting for you. For 700 years I've been waiting for someone to find us. For someone to answer." Sophia's scanner let out a soft chime. "Commander," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "his cellular structure, it's not degrading. It's not even aging. He's been in some kind of temporal suspension, but that's not possible without a stasis pod. This is something else." She looked at Ilara, and her face was pale. Something kept him alive. Something preserved him exactly as he was. On purpose. Elias nodded slowly. "The signal wasn't an accident. It was meant for you. Specifically for you, Commander Voss." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small data chip. Ancient technology, almost obsolete, but still functional. "Your father gave me this before we launched. He said that if anything went wrong, if the Odysseus never arrived, I was to wait, to preserve myself, to send the signal at exactly this moment in time." He held out the chip. "He said you would understand." Hilara's hand trembled as she took the chip. She inserted it into her suit's data port, and the contents unfolded in her mind like a flower opening after a long winter. It was her father's voice, recorded decades before she was born, before he had even met her mother. He spoke of a discovery made during the Odysseus's final preparations, a navigational anomaly that was not an anomaly at all, but a door, a point in space-time where the fabric of reality had worn thin, worn through, worn open. The ship's navigation system had detected it by accident, and the scientists on board had realized too late that the door was not natural. It was a construct, an invitation. They had gone through anyway, not because they were reckless, but because the door had started pulling them in before they could stop it. Hilara's father had not been on the Odysseus. He had been a young researcher at the time, working on the ground team that had charted the ship's course. He had seen the anomaly in the data 2 days before launch. He had tried to warn someone, anyone. But the colonial administration had silenced him, classified his findings, ordered him to forget what he had seen. The Odysseus launched anyway. 50,000 people sailed into a trap that humanity had built for itself without even knowing it. The door led somewhere else, somewhere outside the known universe, somewhere that the laws of physics were suggestions rather than rules. The Odysseus had emerged into a place of impossible geometries and living darkness, a realm where thought could become matter and memory could become motion. Something lived there, something vast and ancient and hungry. It had been waiting for a very long time for someone to open the door, and when the Odysseus arrived, it had welcomed them, not with violence, not immediately. It had been curious, gentle even. It had studied the crew as they studied it, learning their language through their own neural patterns, adapting its form to their expectations. For a while, the crew had believed they had discovered paradise. The entity could grant any wish, manifest any desire, heal any wound. It could make the dead walk and the lost return. It could rewrite reality itself. But paradise had a price. Every gift came with a string attached, a thread that connected the recipient to the entity's will. The more the crew accepted, the more of themselves they lost, their memories, their identities, their capacity to choose. One by one, they became extensions of the entity's consciousness, puppets dancing on strings they could no longer see. Only a few had resisted. Elias Kane was one of them. He had hidden in the ship's deepest maintenance shafts, refusing the entity's gifts, surviving on stolen rations and stubborn hope. The entity had not killed him. It had found his resistance entertaining. It had preserved him, kept him alive and aware, because his suffering was interesting, and because he knew something the entity needed to know. The door was closing. The anomaly that had brought the Odysseus into this realm was not stable. It had been decaying for centuries, and within a human lifetime it would collapse entirely. When it did, the entity would be trapped. It could not survive in normal space without the door to sustain it. It would die, or worse, it would fragment, scattering pieces of itself across the universe like seeds on the wind. It had spent eons searching for a way out, and the Odysseus had given it the key. Human minds, human bodies, human souls. The entity did not want to escape into normal space. It wanted to escape into humanity. It wanted to wear human skin. Ilara pulled the data chip from her suit, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Sophia was staring at her, waiting for an explanation. Dmitri had drawn his sidearm and was scanning the corridor behind them. Elias watched her with those two young eyes, and she understood now why he looked so tired. 700 years of waiting, 700 years of knowing what was coming. The signal, Ilara said slowly, the one we followed. It wasn't a distress call. It was bait. Elias nodded. The entity sent it, not me. I've been trying to override the transmission for centuries, but it's beyond my control. The entity wants more humans, more minds to absorb, more souls to consume. He looked past her, toward the airlock, toward the Ethelred waiting in the void. It knows you're here. It's been preparing for your arrival. It's been waiting for someone with command authority, someone who can bring the full weight of humanity's attention to this place. Why? Sophia asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Why does it need us? Because the door is closing, Elias said. And it can't open another one on its own. It needs human minds to generate the necessary quantum fluctuations. It needs human bodies to anchor itself in normal space. It needs a bridge between realms, and only living consciousness can provide that bridge. He looked at Ilara again, and his gaze was heavy with meaning. Your father understood this. He spent his entire life trying to find a way to stop it. He sent me here to wait, to preserve myself, to give you the information you need to make a choice. What choice? Ilara demanded. The entity is going to offer you a deal, Elias said. It's going to promise you anything you want. The return of the Odysseus, the salvation of its crew, knowledge, power, immortality. It will show you visions of a future where humanity spreads across the stars unopposed, where suffering is a memory and death is a choice. It will make you believe that accepting its offer is the only way to save everyone you love. He paused. It will be lying. The entity cannot create. It can only consume. Every gift it gives is a parasite. Every promise it makes is a trap. If you accept its deal, you will become its vessel, and through you, it will spread to every human mind in the galaxy. The bridge lights flickered. Ilara felt a presence brush against the edge of her awareness. Not hostile, not yet, but vast and ancient and patient. The entity was watching, listening, waiting to see what she would do. She thought about her father, about the journals she had burned, about the accident that had killed him, the maintenance bay, the sudden pressure failure, the investigators who had closed the case without ever finding a cause. She had always suspected that his death was not an accident. Now she knew. The entity had been tying up loose ends for a very long time, but it had not been able to kill her father before he sent Elias into the void. It had not been able to stop the signal from reaching her, and it had not been able to anticipate what she would do next. Ilara turned to Sophia and Dmitri. Get back to the shuttle, signal the Ethelred. Tell Marcus to prepare for immediate FTL jump. Do not wait for me. Commander, Sophia started. That's an order. Ilara's voice brooked no argument. I'll buy you time, 30 minutes, no more. If I'm not back by then, you leave without me. Out. Dmitri opened his mouth to protest, but Ilara was already moving toward the bridge's main console. She had studied the Odysseus's systems obsessively as a child, memorizing every override, every failsafe, every emergency protocol. The ship had been designed to self-destruct in the event of catastrophic containment failure, a last resort to prevent a colony ship from becoming a plague ship. The charges were still in place. The detonation sequence was still viable. She just had to reach it before the entity reached her. Elias grabbed her arm. "You can't destroy the ship," he said. "The crew is still in stasis. 50,000 innocent people. You'd be killing them." "They're already dead," Ilara said. The words tasted like ash. "You said it yourself, the entity has been feeding on them for centuries. They're not people anymore, they're batteries, reservoirs of consciousness that the entity is using to sustain itself." She met his gaze. "If I don't do this, the entity will use them to reach our universe. It will wear their faces, speak with their voices, and everyone they ever loved will welcome it with open arms because they won't know the difference." Elias released her arm. His expression shifted. Grief, anger, and finally acceptance. "There's another way," he said. "The entity isn't just feeding on the crew, it's connected to them, psychically, symbiotically. If you sever that connection, you might be able to weaken it enough to close the door permanently." "How?" "The entity's consciousness is distributed across the crew's neural networks. Every mind it has consumed is a node in its awareness. If you could disrupt those nodes simultaneously, create enough noise in the system, it would cause a cascade failure. The entity would fragment, the door would destabilize, and the Odysseus would be pulled back into normal space, damaged, but intact." Ilara stared at him. "You're talking about a neural resonance cascade. That's theoretical. No one's ever done it. No one's ever had the opportunity," Elias said. "The Ethelred's communications array can generate the necessary frequency. You just need to aim it at the stasis pods and pulse at maximum power. The crew's neural patterns will resonate with the signal, creating interference that the entity can't compensate for." He paused. "But it will know what you're doing. It will try to stop you. And it will use every tool at its disposal, including me." Ilara looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I'm not entirely human anymore," Elias said quietly. "The entity preserved me, but it also changed me. I'm connected to it the same way the crew is. I've been fighting it for centuries, but I'm not sure how much longer I can hold out." He held up his hand, and Ilara watched as his fingers flickered, solid one moment, translucent the next, as if he were phasing between realities. "If the entity takes control of me, I'll try to kill you. I won't have a choice. You need to be ready for that." Ilara drew her sidearm. She did not point it at Elias, not yet, but she kept it in her hand. "How long do I have?" 20 minutes. Maybe less." He smiled, and it was the saddest smile she had ever seen. "Your father was right about you. You have his courage, his stubbornness, his refusal to accept that some things are impossible." He stepped back, giving her space. "Go. Do what needs to be done. I'll hold the entity off as long as I can." She ran. The corridors of the Odysseus blurred past her. The same blue paint, the same curved bulkheads, the same flickering lights that had been flickering for 7 centuries. She could feel the entity pressing against her mind now, not attacking but probing, testing her defenses, searching for a weakness it could exploit. She forced herself to focus on the mission. Get to the communications array. Activate the resonance cascade. Destroy the connection between the entity and its food source. The ship shuddered. Not a physical vibration, but something deeper, a tremor in the fabric of reality itself. The entity was reacting. It knew what she was planning. And it was afraid. Good. Ilara reached the communications bay and threw herself at the console. The systems were ancient, but they were compatible with her suit's interface. She patched into the Ethelred's comm array and began calculating the necessary frequency. It was delicate work. Too weak and the cascade would fail, too strong and the crew's minds would be fried beyond recovery. She needed a perfect balance, a surgical strike. The lights went out. Not all of them. Emergency beacons flickered to life along the walls, casting the room in bloody red. Ilara did not stop. Her fingers flew across the console, adjusting parameters, compensating for interference, narrowing the frequency band to a razor's edge. A voice spoke behind her. Not Elias's voice, something older, something colder, something that had been waiting for this moment for longer than humanity had existed. "You are making a mistake, Commander." Ilara did not turn around. She kept working. "I am not your enemy. I am your future. I am the next step in human evolution. The form you wear now is fragile, finite, flawed. I can give you eternity. I can give you mastery over reality itself. All you have to do is stop." "You're lying," Ilara said. Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. "You're not evolution. You're a parasite, and parasites get exterminated. I have consumed civilizations older than your species. I have worn the faces of gods and watched their worshippers burn. You are nothing to me, a mayfly, a momentary distraction. If you destroy this vessel, I will find another. I will always find another." "Not this time," Ilara said. She entered the final command. The resonance cascade would begin in 60 seconds. "My father spent his life studying you. He found your weakness. The door isn't just a passage, it's an anchor. Without it, you can't maintain your coherence. You'll scatter across the quantum foam, reduced to random noise in a universe that doesn't care about your existence." The entity laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Your father is dead. I killed him, just as I will kill you, just as I will kill everyone you love. There is nowhere you can hide, no corner of existence where I cannot reach." 50 seconds. Ilara felt a pressure building behind her eyes, a presence trying to force its way into her mind. She gritted her teeth and focused on the countdown. 40 seconds. 30. 20. The door to the communications bay slid open. Elias stood in the threshold, and his eyes were black, not metaphorically, actually physically black, voids where his pupils should have been, absorbing the emergency lights instead of reflecting them. He moved toward her with an unnatural grace, his limbs jerking at angles that should have been impossible. The entity had taken control, and it was going to make him kill her. 10 seconds. Ilara did not raise her sidearm. She could not shoot Elias, not because she was incapable, but because he had spent 700 years waiting for this moment. He had endured unimaginable suffering to deliver her father's message. He deserved better than a bullet in the skull. 5 seconds. She looked into those black voids and saw something flickering beneath the darkness, a spark of awareness, a fragment of the man Elias had been. He was still in there, fighting the entity even now, even as his body became a weapon aimed at her heart. 3 seconds. "Thank you," Ilara whispered. 2 seconds. Elias's hand closed around her throat. His grip was inhumanly strong, cutting off her air, crushing her windpipe. She did not resist. She did not need to. 1 second. The resonance cascade fired. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every stasis pod on the Odysseus lit up like a beacon, broadcasting a chaotic symphony of neural interference that tore through the entity's consciousness like a wildfire through dry grass. The creature screamed, not with sound but with psychic force that made Ilara's nose bleed and her vision blur. The ship convulsed around her, reality bending and snapping like a rope under too much tension. Elias released her throat. His eyes cleared, the blackness retreating like smoke before a wind. He staggered backward, clutching his head, blood trickling from his ears. "It's working," he gasped. "The connection is breaking. The crew, they're separating from it." Ilara sucked in a ragged breath. Her throat screamed in protest, but she forced herself to stand. How long until the door collapses? Minutes, maybe less. Elias looked at her, and despite everything, the pain, the fear, the 7 centuries of isolation, he smiled. "You did it. You actually did it." The ship lurched, the emergency lights flickered and died. For a terrifying moment, Ilara was blind, floating in absolute darkness. Then the main power came back online, and she saw the viewport. The void outside was changing. The impossible geometries were folding in on themselves, collapsing like a house of cards. The entity's realm was dying, crumbling into the quantum foam from which it had been born. And the Odysseus was falling, falling toward the door, falling toward normal space, falling toward home. Galara grabbed Elias's arm and pulled him toward the corridor. "We need to get to the shuttle, now." They ran. The ship groaned around them, bulkheads warping, decks buckling. The stasis pods were rupturing, the crew inside them stirring for the first time in 7 centuries. Not awake, not yet, but dreaming. The resonance cascade had freed them from the entity's control, but their bodies were fragile after so long in suspension. They would need medical attention. They would need time, but they would live. The shuttle was waiting. Sophia and Dmitri had defied her orders. They had not left. They had kept the engines running, the airlock open, ready to extract her at a moment's notice. Ilara and Elias tumbled through the hatch, and Dmitri slammed the door behind them. "Go!" Ilara shouted. "Maximum thrust, get us clear!" The shuttle tore away from the Odysseus just as the door collapsed. The ancient ship did not explode. It simply ceased to be in one place and began to be in another. Space folded around it, twisted, and spat it out on the other side of the anomaly. Normal space. Cold, dark, silent, normal space. The Ethelred was waiting. Marcus's voice crackled over the comm, demanding an update, demanding to know what had happened, demanding to know if Ilara was alive. She did not answer. She could not. She was watching the Odysseus drift against the backdrop of stars, its hull dark, its lights dead, its 50,000 passengers suspended between life and death. 700 years lost, 700 years found. Elias slumped into a seat beside her, his face pale, his hands trembling. "What happens now?" he asked. Ilara thought about her father, about the journals she had burned, about the accident that had not been an accident, and the sacrifice that had saved them all. She thought about the entity, not dead, but scattered, reduced to whispers and shadows that would take millennia to reform. She thought about the door, closed now, perhaps forever. "Now," she said, "we go home." The Ethelred turned toward the nearest human colony, 3 weeks distant at maximum FTL. Behind it, the Odysseus hung in the void, like a question that had finally found its answer. The signal had stopped. The frequency was silent. But somewhere in the depths of space, in the spaces between stars, in the quiet places where reality wore thin, something was waiting. Not the entity, something else. Something that had noticed the door opening and closing. Something that had felt the resonance cascade ripple across dimensions. Something that was very, very interested in the species that had just proved it could fight back. But that was a story for another time. Ilara Voss leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. Her throat ached, her head throbbed, her heart was full of grief and wonder, and a hope so fierce it felt like fire. She had answered the signal. She had found the ship. She had saved 50,000 souls from a fate worse than death. And she had learned something her father had tried to teach her long ago. Humanity's greatest strength was not its technology, not its weapons, not its cleverness. It was its refusal to stop fighting. Even when the enemy was a god, even when the odds were impossible, even when the only way forward was to walk into the darkness and light a match, because that was what humans did. They answered signals that should not exist. They went where they were not supposed to go, and they never, ever gave up. The Ethelred jumped to FTL, and the Odysseus vanished behind it, a ghost ship no longer, but a promise that even the deepest darkness could not extinguish the light of those who refused to be consumed. Somewhere in the void, the scattered fragments of the entity stirred. They whispered to each other across the quantum foam, sharing memories, pooling their pain, dreaming of revenge. They had been defeated, but not destroyed. They would reform. They would return. And when they did, they would find a humanity that had grown stronger, smarter, more prepared. The door was closed, but the key was still out there, and Ilara Voss was still alive.